We're going to focus on two things today, and that is the key elements in terms of setting up and planning for success. And then we're also going to focus on comparing and contrasting different industries as to how they go about their approach. Keen to understand whether or not people are in agreement that the approach is the same or whether or not it differs across the different industries. So we have 4 panelists. Apologies to anybody that looks at diversity. We have 4 very similar looking profiles when it's not just because they're black and white. I might just ask each to quickly introduce themselves, starting from left and right. Colin, I wondered if you could tell us a bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Colin Hart. As it says, I'm the European Commercial Director for Edwards Life Sciences, and we are an American-owned company that offer basically cardiac monitoring products and replacement heart valves to the healthcare industry, where effectively our stakeholders are surgeons and healthcare professionals, but really our customers are the procurement and purchasing departments. So price increases is very sensitive to us because obviously in the UK we have the NHS, which is a very, very public market. So we have experience to share with you guys today.
Okay, great. Thanks, Colin. Matt.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Parsons. I'm the Senior VP for Sales for Big Bus Tours. We're a private equity, medium-sized enterprise, turnover about 200 million, employing about 2,000 people. We operate in 19 cities. Many of you may or may not have taken one of our tours. Our aim is to be the #1 thing to do in every famous city. Price increases are really interesting for us because it's probably the first time we've looked at it in much detail, believe it or not. But our customers are really the consumers. We're more of a B2C business, selling directly to consumer with some B2B and a growing B2B. So looking forward to talking more.
Great stuff. Thanks, Matt. It'd be interesting to compare and contrast your approaches to B2B versus B2C. Simon.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Simon Soothill. I am the potential pantomime villain. So my background is very much around procurement. I've led global procurement, particularly in the indirect space, especially marketing for companies like Diageo. So again, in terms of Chester's introduction, always interested in the budget as a pensioner shareholder. Also doing the same at Accenture for a few years. And latterly Lloyds Banking Group, where I led the sourcing teams for marketing and for travel. And subsequent to that, I've become an independent consultant. So what I'm hoping to do is offer maybe a counterpoint to those that Colin, Matt and Mark will be providing.
Yes, and that's very much the reason for asking you to join us, Simon. I think it's nothing like poacher come gamekeeper. If you can understand the other side of the equation, it makes the internal selling story that the procurement team have that much easier. Last and not least, Mr. Francis, please introduce yourself.
My name is Mark Francis. I lead on behalf of the Star Commercial Academy, 16 global sales academies for our customers. And I work for and with Matt and Colin, who are on this call. My mindset is that the mindset is all wrong if you're trying to land price rises. And if you get the mindset right, you've got a chance to improve skill set. More of that later.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Mark. So I think in terms of just the plan and flow as to what we're going to do here, I'm going to start by asking Matt more about the planning, the process of going through, working out what it is you want to do. And I think, Matt, I wanted to start with a question around, what do you think the critical factors are that leads you up to the decision that you need to actually take price?
Yeah, sure. I would point to 3 things. I think the first thing is probably consumer insight. That, for us, that was the most important. We wanted to get a really good view on what the consumers thought about Big Bus, our products, our prices, how easy was it to purchase from us, how difficult was it to purchase from us. So more around their perception of us as a company and what pricing opportunities that could give, but also product opportunities. So first one was insight. Secondly, there was a real motivation to centralize more. So we were, as of 2 years ago, private equity with a view to build the business and sell the business. That led to many more controlling 18 cities, whereby they really built city by city based on us taking over an existing company. There was very little central discipline. So the second was probably a motivation to see how we could do things quicker, better, more profitably. And probably the third thing was close to everyone is P&L, and we use EBITDA. So really a kind of motivation to see how we could influence EBITDA. They're probably the three, I'd say, three most important.
So one was very much external, assess the environment, and then two were more kind of internal factors around your fiscal ambitions, yes? Yeah,
but I think the first one, the consumer insight, drove most of practically what we're doing on price, because we kind of came up with a sort of an understanding that actually our sector wasn't as sensitive to price change as we believed it was. We have a big legacy that thinking that we're probably more sensitive in terms of price change than reality. So that's the place we're in now, yeah.
Okay, that's fascinating to find the insight drives the action. So in terms of then lifting that insight, what are the things that you then go about doing when you're actually planning to put potentially a price increase through?
Tons of financial modelling, of course, but practically in terms of operationalising that, I think a couple of things I'd point to. One is planning it a long way out, and to coincide with our financial year. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I think planning a phased delivery where you can test in a couple of places first, check your insight, check your elasticity, and looking at from our point of view, a couple of cities where we could just see the competitor reaction. Are they coming with us? We have a circa 35 to 40% market share in our cities, and therefore the responsibility is kind of on us to look at price and make sure it's right. Yeah. So we wanted to test that theory. And I think probably the other factor is explaining the why we're doing this to people internally and externally. That was one big thing, because we kind of knew that we always talk about the what and the how, but really people buy the why. Why are you doing this? It's not profiteering, it's so we can reinvest back in the industry, the category, the operations that we have in every city. So I think really planning more time to do the why and what audiences you do that with was another critical part.
Okay. And in terms of just that why then, when you're talking about the messaging, are you talking about to consumers, or are you then talking more about an internal communications piece?
Internal and to customers, to partners, I think, not to consumer. Okay, I think, yeah, absolutely. So internally to all the operations people and the leaders, the VPs in each city, why are we making this price change? What's it all about? And then importantly, to our trade partners. So hotels that sell us, or Expedia, Viatools, all these kind of people. Explaining to them why we're moving price. At the same time, we also moved our product line up and made that a little bit simpler. So really, I think planning more time for the why was a big learning.
Okay, so help us just understand the timeline then that you're operating to. What would you say is an average kind of time that you would put in a plan from the insight generation through into actually know what we're going to go live and we are going to execute this on a particular day? Help us understand what that looks like. Yeah,
the insight started probably this last summer. So we began we used an external partner to look at the whole consumer insight, what they thought of us. And that was a big piece. That was 4 or 5 months worth of work, and then agreeing that internally and what the recommendations were. And then we got into the autumn, and the autumn was really where we started to think about how we do this. So when do we want to do this? And mapping that out, financially modeling the implications, moving from where we are now to where we want to get to in terms of price and product. And we'll execute it at the start of our financial year, which will be April 1. So you imagine from July all the way through to April, that's all been majority of planning that price change.
It's probably surprising to think that it takes just that long to get it right. I guess do you find yourself having to tweak stuff based on insight changing and the environment changing as you go?
No, I think that's our legacy, actually. I think our legacy, and I'm sure it's quicker in consumer industries, but our legacy, one of actually never really centralizing this approach to price, always been very much a city by city decision based on, hey, what do we think the consumer's going to pay and what do we think the competition will do, rather than a central view of, okay, so what prices do we need to take to the consumer and why? Let's call the products the same thing in the same cities and why we want to do that. How do we think that price change is going to model centrally in terms of our P&L? So centralizing that, I think, was a big hurdle for us. That was the first time we've ever done that.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'm going to switch just to bring in Colin here, because he's obviously in a different industry. And I guess having heard what Matt had to say there, Colin, could you compare the kind of the medical industry and the timescales and the timelines that you guys might operate to?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm a bit jealous of Matt that he has so much control over his destiny. I mean, we're an American healthcare provider, and we're very much top down in ours. So, you know, we get told things that we're going to do based on our strategies because of our contribution size. You know, we're viewed upon as being less of a contributor in the EU than perhaps North America or Asia Pacific. And if we want to invest in our own resources, we have to self-fund through our own abilities at P&L. So effectively, we're told, you know, they want to see improved prices or improved GP, and we have to go and put strategies per country together to make that happen. And of course, we have different healthcare systems in different countries, but fundamentally, they all have the same problems, which is that, you know, we are an aging population in healthcare in terms of the patients, and the generation of baby boom now is the generation that's actually breaking down. So pretty much every healthcare system is breaking down as a consequence because the demand's so very high. So our decisions really are made based on how we can still gain in that sensitive market, but we're more or less told in a strategy term what we have to go and do. So interestingly, our company is even saying, you know, they're happy for us to lose market share if we gain gross profit effectively. So, you know, we can lose 50% of our business if we improve our GP and can kind of equalise, which is not something that necessarily each country wants to do, because we've built relationships over a very long time. But that is kind of the corporate world with American companies, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear both from yourself and Matt that, you know, there's quite a strong driver of internal ambition versus it just being a reaction to the environment and competitor activity.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a good year in terms of, or I should say, we've had a good ride in terms of our pricing. If I'm absolutely honest with you, innovation to the market.
And I'm keen, Colin, that we don't, you know, have to get into what you've done. We're trying to explore more the how, because I don't really think we don't want to be sharing that in a public forum. But
no, I was going to say that we've had a good ride in terms of keeping prices very, very flat for a number of years. So this day was always coming for us, you know, in terms of having to step it up. Okay.
So in terms of kind of thinking about the planning that you put your sales team into there, Colin, then, you know, what are you doing in terms of your priorities when you get your team together? How do you prioritize the planning of the price increase from more of an implementation perspective?
Well, the first thing we did actually is panic, if I'm absolutely honest with you, because I said to you before, you know, we have different teams in different countries with different systems, but we got one message for everybody here. So the first thing is we panicked because we aren't capable of I didn't think, changing everybody's mindsets internally. So we seeked help externally. So and do you want me to go on and tell you what we did?
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So you know, we went external, turned to Mr. Francis for ideas, really to say, you know, how do we go about changing the mindset of our reps and our business managers, and effectively we pulled a workshop together where we put the harsh message out to everybody in that room. You know, this is what we're going to do as a strategy, guys, and we delivered the message straight away to all our senior managers. And then we waited and did an exorcism, if you will. We heard all the reactions, and we listed everything that all the reasons why we couldn't do it. And there was loads. You can imagine we had whiteboards full of the arguments against doing it. But it was a good experience. We listed every single objection, and we as I say, like an exorcism, we got it all out there in the open on the reasons why we couldn't do it. And then Mark got us all to work in teams and find out solutions to all the objections that we'd put together, which was a fascinating because everybody came up with different solutions. And what happened actually during that process was that we kind of, by going through this process, enlisted ownership, and suddenly all these people that said we can't do this and were outraged by the idea became kind of owners that felt almost excited and justified about going out there and seeing if they could actually do it. It was a huge transformation in the actual room there, and Mark was present at the time, and everybody walked away, came into the room with a can't do attitude and walked away with a can do and will do attitude. It was an amazing thing to see.
Well, Colin, that sounds like a perfect segue into Mark. Mark, probably can you talk a bit about the alchemy that goes behind that change?
Well, yeah, classically, as Colin says, the mindset of most salespeople, including myself as a salesperson, is that price rises is bad news. And I want to avoid it. I want to avoid the conversation. I'm defensive. I don't acknowledge any kind of buyer response to my first suggestion. So as Colin said, we need to understand that mindset, and you need to work with it, unlock it, and then work on skill development. If you don't change the mindset, you won't change behavior.
Thanks, Mark. So, Colin, in terms of just the experience you've been through and the mindset change, what would your kind of key watch outs be in terms of the lessons you've learned having been through that process once so far?
Well, certainly that you don't do the exorcism bit for too long. I mean, getting all the objections out there early and then finding solutions to them is absolutely key, because otherwise you're going to end up with, as you roll this out to different regions, their own set of objections. So what was key is that we got the people that were going to manage those people on board first, and we gave them ownership to go out there and change the mindset of their own reps. But we had a solid base of arguments to give them. The difference was in our original meeting with the managers, we found out what all the solutions were to overcome the objections. But once they were armed with that, they were able to put those into more realistic country-specific arguments. So they went back to teach their own reps what was going to happen in terms of the strategy, but they also had a solution early, which was fundamental.
So that customization, that localization, that rather than a big centralized broad brush stroke approach, yeah?
Absolutely, because it still meant that even though we're this big corporate company that we're going to say you will do this, we're able to sort of tailor it and be more sensitive to each market, which made a lot of common sense and kind of gave our guys the ownership they really wanted over the project.
So on that point, I'd like to just flick back to Matt, because I know, Matt, you talked about the kind of centralization approach at Big Bus. Are you looking at a local market application, or are you looking at a more centralized approach?
So to kick this off, because this was the first time the company had ever undertaken this, we wanted to get our arms around it and control it for our annual price change. And the word annual price change had never been in the vocabulary of the company before. So I think stage one is that. What we do know is in our industry, there's surge, peak pricing, whatever you call it. We all know that prices change when you book a hotel at certain times of the year. And kind of that was an observation for us. Actually, we never capitalized on that. And therefore, that's where the local knowledge and insight has to come. So kind of we stage one has been, let's get our arms around it and just get a process and a way of managing that annual price change that we all understand and our customers buy into. But then stage two will be, at the peaks of trade, when we can, should we take advantage of price in a different way, as hotels do, as kind of airlines do, and can we use that lever, but not just price, but also package and product at the same time. So that's where there'll be a local, if you like, some local empowerment to do that. But we realise we're going to have to set some kind of rules of engagement around that and how that works. And that's to come, by the way, and that's new for us as a company. So that will come almost like phase two. Once phase one and if you like, all the stakeholders are used to this kind of more centralized view of pricing.
And just help us understand the pricings, the surge that you talked about there. Does your pricing fluctuate throughout the year then?
No, it hasn't tended to. It hasn't tended to, because I guess we're in the travel industry, but we're a very small part of it. We're not like a kind of EasyJet where prices fluctuate dynamically from day to day, because you have a plane that has a certain capacity and there's supply and demand. We have 400 buses and people move on and off them from day to day, from hour to hour. So our capacity changes. The demand and supply is very different. But what we do know is at certain times of the year, we don't have enough spaces on the buses, and therefore demand is bigger than supply. And therefore, why would we discount to the consumer? We need to be taking advantage of that and actually investing that money back into the tool so that we have the next generation of buses with the right technology, we have the right staff, etc. So we can invest that back in the business.
Okay, so if I play back what I heard there, actually what you're doing is you hold a headline price, and what you're playing around with is the level of incentive to engage people to choose to buy into your preferred service.
Yeah, but we may well move the headline price as we go through the year, but that will be a local flavour. Our annual price change for 8-9 months of the year that comes at the start of the financial, we will control centrally, and then we will find ways that at certain peaks, cities, leaders in the cities can then move their prices if they need to for maybe a competitive reason or strategic reason or a capacity reason.
I wanted to keep the four of us, the five of us involved, so I wanted to bring in Simon at this point as well. You've been very kindly and patiently sitting there listening into the first three speakers. Simon, just listening to what the individuals have been saying, have you got any points of reflection from somebody that receives this information?
Yes, I do, as you can imagine. So I think the first thing is, from a buy side point of view, obviously my initial reaction is to say no and put the phone down. But I think there was a lot of resonance, actually. I think what we've all got to bear in mind is that there has to be a partnership type approach. There has to be mutuality. And so the sort of things that I think about when I hear kind of Matt talk about the why. So there's price rises that are, and obviously that's kind of all B2C, but there's price rises that are going to enhance the service, enhance the proposition, et cetera, et cetera. So, what I would do and what I'd encourage my teams to do is initially is really kind of take a step back and understand the impact of the proposed price increase. So what's the immediate impact? What's the long-term impact? And also to look back. So a lot of what I deal with, if I look at the marketing space, a big element of the cost is people. And historically, there has been very little wage inflation in the marketing, kind of the commercial space. So actually, a lot of marketing suppliers have not historically taken annual price rises. So again, you look to understand the context. I then think, to Matt's point, it's about understanding that why. What are the factors behind what the supplier is proposing in terms of that price increase? Do they make sense? Do they hold true? Do I believe them? Is this just an opportunity to enhance margin? So these are the kind of questions that I would be asking. How well does what the supplier is suggesting, how does that chime with the market dynamics? And then I think you start to say, well, two things. So one is, how important is the supplier? So if what the supplier is providing is critical to my business, and are they a partner, or are they, in inverted commas, just a supplier? Could I swap them out easily to a supplier who's not proposing price increase? So you start to look at those kind of dynamics. And then I think the other thing, from a sales point of view, that I'm interested in understanding is, what alternatives are there to just taking a price increase? So what are you as a seller trying to do that helps me mitigate that price increase? So an example being, if it is people cost, and you have a particular resource profile, and therefore that's partly driving a price increase, can you offer me the same service levels at a slightly reduced resource profile? Therefore, I don't actually take a price increase, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. Colin, Simon's just talked about belief, and we talked about preparing your sales team. In terms of instilling belief, how do you as a sales leader go about instilling that belief in the healthcare industry?
Do you mean to the would-be buyers, or do you mean to our sales force?
To your sales force, so that they are delivering that brief. So I guess I'm talking probably about presenting a revised value proposition or an
Yeah.
enhanced value proposition.
Yeah, effectively, to any healthcare system these days, there's absolutely no way you can walk in with a shiny new product and say to a buyer, I think you should have this, it's going to cost this much. Effectively, what happens now in any sort of healthcare sale is there has to be a return on investment in anything you sell. There has to be a value proposition. And as to Simon's point, that's exactly what we instill in our sales teams. So they have to be armed with the economical and efficiency arguments and the better clinical outcome arguments, so that someone in a buying situation can understand that the left hand may have to pay more for this, but somebody with a helicopter view can see that they're going to save a lot more money, or they're going to drive a lot more efficiency in the right hand. And so one of our issues really is getting a buying or a purchasing department to really understand the helicopter view and really understand what it is that our products offer.
And in terms of in terms of that offer, then how has that been revised over the past couple of years? You talked about that there hasn't been price increase in the past. How have you amended that proposition to meet that change?
Well, the first thing I think we had to do is analyse what we were already doing. I mean, effectively, we're market leaders, and we have our fingers in quite a lot of the pies. And the reality is we've been complacent. So we've had contracts and we've kept contracts, and year after year after year. And we've stopped even looking at what the value we're giving that customer, just a contract we have in place already, and we plough on with our new innovation. So what we had to do was take a break and look at what we were already doing, and then try and add to that within those accounts. So effectively our sales guys learned to see the value of a customer already, and then try and build upon what we were already doing, because we already had those relationships. But going there with innovation that's really going to, and I think Matt said it earlier, was to really partner with hospitals now. I mean, we're selling to a very public environment, and so we give more value in what we do now. We don't just sell products, we do professional education, and we take responsibility for educating healthcare professionals and nurses so that they can do a better job and they can get a better clinical outcome. And that also drives efficiency to the buyer.
And then stepping outside of that, of the healthcare industry, Mark, I wanted to bring you in just because you've worked with a lot of the food and drink industry, and I'm conscious budget day might mean that there's some pricing coming through, particularly in the alcohol industry. What is your experience of how FMCG industries kind of maybe a change from the leisure and the healthcare that we've heard about? How are they going about approaching the same challenges?
I'm so glad you asked that, because we've got people listening from tea makers, alcohol, food producers, and fast-moving consumer goods, very different. So if I think about Matt's industry, it's creating a full-day customer experience. Think about Colin, it's about advanced patient care. These are hugely valuable. How do I then convince a salesperson who is selling a product which is eaten quickly or drunk quickly that a price increase is part of a value proposition? That's the essence. Because at the moment it's a tough one. Salespeople think, oh my God, I've got to sell a price rise in. When actually they should be thinking exactly as Simon has suggested. What about partnership? What about mutuality? What about genuine value adding?
And it's a great checklist of stuff to go through. I'll have to write that down and put it on a blog or publish it somewhere. Thanks for that, Mark. In terms of just your observations, because you actually have a broad cross-section of customers, what do you most commonly see, Mark, commercial teams not doing in terms of getting themselves set up and planned and prepared in advance?
Well, pretty much everything our other guests have said, but not doing it. So no early warning to buyer, no understanding of impact to the buyer, no proper customer segmentation, no scenario planning, and no rehearsal.
Okay, another fantastic list from Mr. Francis there. Simon, in terms of just hearing that list, I'm keen to to hear the kind of the opposite side, and some of the experiences you've had of some of your people coming up to you and with a proposal. You share any case studies or any examples of things that you've seen people forget to do that you really wish that they would have done?
Yeah, I mean, I think typically the buying experience is, the mirror image of the selling experience. So, if I am shocked or surprised by a price increase, that's not great. That's going to immediately put my hackles up. It's going to put me on the defensive rather than, to Mark's point, on the kind of being willing to listen and understand. So I think there's a piece around no surprises. I think there's a real piece around the provision of clarity. So why is this price increase happening? Be as transparent as you can. One thing that I've seen work really well is where a seller introduces their buyers to the customer buyer. I'm sorry if that's a bit complex, but if you think particularly in that kind of food and drink area where you've got a lot of commodity price impact that is inherent in the product cost to me as a buyer, then if you as the seller introduce the guys who are actually buying the ingredients, buying the logistics, buying the factory capacity, the whatever, and help me as the buyer understand it from a buyer's perspective, then that can be really powerful. And I've seen that work. So again, you as the sales guy, don't view you're not the only point of influence on the buying decision. And I think the other thing I'd offer up is, again, in the same way as typically, we view the interaction to be between an individual sales guy and an individual buying guy. Bear in mind that behind me as a buying guy sits my boss, typically the chief procurement officer, who's got very hard targets around savings. Think also that behind the buying guy, there are the stakeholders, so the people who are actually influenced by the decision. So a lot of what I've been involved in historically has been on services. So again, I may be buying marketing services, but it's actually the marketing department who are utilizing the agencies, utilizing the creative, the media, the whatever. So again, don't just look at it from a buyer's perspective, look at it from the end user's perspective. And that should help you create your story, your narrative around, the reasons behind the price increase, and then also what you believe to be the impact, and then furthermore, what you believe to be the mitigations.
And Simon, I've got a question that's come in from one of our audience, which is around what are the internal discussions and actions that need to be had? Help us just understand the internal journey that once you get a proposition put in front of you, what's the kind of the nuts and bolts of what happens after that initial meeting?
So after I put the phone down and said no, so yeah, that's a good question. So I think typically the first thing that what I would do is I'd engage the business stakeholders. So again, it's those users, the end users, the people who will be impacted, or people whom these goods or services they use. So I really want to understand their perspective. I want to then work with them to look at what tactical strategic options are there. And it comes back to what I said kind of far earlier on, how strategic, how important is the supplier? How strategic, how important is the thing or things that they're providing? How flexible, therefore, does that allow me, to kind of make decisions around the sourcing? So, it's those kind of things. And then I think, and again, it's no great surprise, a mirror to what Colin outlined. I would be spending time looking through the counter arguments, looking through the objection handling, looking through what my position is, and almost potentially kind of working through a decision tree. So if I believe my response is going to be X, and therefore the supplier is either going to say one or two things, if they say thing one, where does that lead me? And so actually kind of mapping out the negotiation. And then also just think, practice makes perfect. So again, particularly for important conversations for with strategic suppliers around strategic commodities or strategic services, then I would be running practice negotiations, with my team. I would have people acting as the sales side, and kind of literally working through those.
So in terms of how the commercial team that are listening in, how they can best approach the proposition that they're presenting with you. What is it that you would leave if you were to people to walk away with 3 or 4 things coming out of it? What can the commercial team do to really empower and help the buyer with that internal selling story then?
Well, I think the first thing is, help me sell, because it's, I, as a procurement guy, have to sell to my business anything that is done, any changes that are made, so price increases particularly. So help me sell in terms of understanding why. So to Matt's earlier point, why is there a price increase? What are the factors behind that? Give me evidence, give me facts, give me supporting data. Because whilst there's a lot of emotion around price increases particularly, I think actually it's about the facts, it's about the evidence, it's about that kind of body of proof points that help articulate the case. But don't overcomplicate it. Give me the sort of 2 or 3 headlines and then give me the supporting data.
And Mark, just turning to you in terms of just helping and supporting the different clients that you have, what are the kind of things that you get involved in terms of supporting that proposition and that selling story, so that the likes of Simon and similar people have that kind of that complete package delivered to them?
Well, one of the things we do, and Tom very kindly alluded to it, is what we call a negotiation clinic. And we do exactly what Simon said. We rehearse. We put ourselves in the shoes of the buyers and say, what do they need to know in order to understand? So that's fundamentally different behavior for a salesperson. So what Simon has articulated, which is please clarify, please justify, please legitimize, please acknowledge, please specify impact. Most salespeople don't even think about that. So the clinic forces them not only to think about it, but to practice managing it.
Thanks, Mark. So in terms of just, if somebody was to pick up the phone and say, Mark, come and help us, what are the types of things that you're looking to understand in order to be able to best assist a client so that you can give them the best focused coaching and mentoring you can?
4 things. What's the outcome of this whole price rise? What is the capability goal and gap in your business, and not just sales team? What's the customer segmentation model?
Yeah.
How broad is that? And to allude to something Simon said, what are the cross-functional touch points? So it isn't just sales, it's also customer service, it's credit control, there's a number.
In terms of just reflections from the points that Mark and Simon have been making around the planning and preparation, is there anything that you've kind of thought of, or as you've been listening, things you've heard that you'd like to build on?
Yeah, I think one thing is it's very easy to think price change, if you're a sales guy, is bad news. It's not always bad news, and your mindset is really important, I think, and that's the part that Mark has helped us with, and the part that I'm trying to put more focus on my teams on, and we said it, is why are we making this change? Where does it fit in the story? Because often it's not just about a price change on a single SKU. Often there's more to the story, and it can be because it means we can then do X, Y, and Z with the business. In my case, it's we can invest in our fleet, we can invest in new technology, we can have new product lineups, we can have more people on our sales team with better service to our customers. So kind of put price in the story, if you like, because it's often part of a story. And that's something I think. So think a lot about the why and be very clear on the why you're doing it, how it fits with the story. First thing. I think the second thing is just engage like crazy. Customers, not necessarily that early with customers, but internally engage very early with people. Most of us work in big businesses, and I think I've learned engaging in the why you're doing it is crucial. I'd say, and also think about the other things that price change is going to mean, because often there are benefits to the customer and stakeholders outside of just that price change. The consumer may end up impacting, but there's terms, there's product changes. There could be kickbacks and overriders to the buyer that actually means the price increase is good for them. Yeah, so I kind of put it in the story, I think, yeah, they're the things I reflect on most.
And in terms of just building on that reflection, then you're an international business, and I'm going to come and probably ask Colin the same question in a second. But
yeah,
there's been a lot of currency volatility,
yeah.
euro and dollar and sterling, to name just three currencies. In terms of presenting currency and the impact of currency to sellers, do you pass on that? Do you involve currency, or do you try to take currency volatility out of the equation?
We tend to take it out because ultimately it's when we're more B2C, it's the consumer that feels that at the front line. So in our markets, we tend to trade in the local currency. So there tends to be an understanding of the consumers when they visit that location and they're on a weekend away or vacation, they kind of understand the currency impact. And also, fortunately, we trade in dollars. Not euros or sterling, which feels good at the moment. Things change there, right? But I think in a B2B environment, it's much more of an impact for sure. If you have price lists that are set in certain currencies, and of course, the further impact from that is intercompany exchanges and parallel trading of commodities, etc., etc. So I think in a B2B environment, much more complicated and needs a lot more thought.
So Colin, in terms of being our B2B panelist, how does Edwards go about dealing with currency volatility?
Well, it's a good question because it affects us massively, and it has done. I mean, particularly in the UK last year, it was the euro to dollar, which we changed internally in our terms of our conversion rate. This year, it was the UK's turn with the pound. So, yeah, we lost a huge amount of sales number off the top of our spreadsheet right from January the 1st this year. But we don't bring it into the argument, honestly. We're commissionaires in each country, and we act that way with our customers. But it's kind of interesting that if I turn to the UK right now, I mean, we've been written to directly from the procurement departments of most of the NHS hospitals in the UK to say, don't even think about blaming currency or Brexit or anything else you want to, if you're going to give us a price increase this year. And in fact, don't even think about giving us a price increase, was their actual message. So they've actually come to us to say, stay away, which is a nice little thing for us to overcome over here. But it does show one thing, which is, and I think Mark alluded to it early, was, procurement people per se is not a place that our sales reps were going. I mean, we influence the user, we influence the healthcare professional, and at the end of all our efforts, we then go into a procurement person and say it's going to cost this much. And we found out the answer is no, it's not, because we don't have the budget. So in actual fact, one of the biggest changes we've done to face that is we bring the procurement person into our buying cycle very, very early now. We trained our guys to understand that these guys are sophisticated buyers, and we have to be sophisticated sellers. And so we engage with them early and try, as Simon said earlier, we try and find ways to partner instead of sell to.
And from my experience, and particularly the food and drink industry as well, as soon as you start bringing currency into a discussion, you've got to remember that currencies will swing back the other way. So it's a dangerous place to play. I think definitely building a solid value proposition around what you bring, what you stand for, how you support your products. They, from my experience, are far more powerful arguments than bringing currency in. Simon, in terms of receiving that as a message, does that put your hackles up? Is that the first thing that makes you say no, or do you actually have to at some time bring in currency volatility into the discussion?
It really depends. It depends on the nature of what it is you're buying, I guess. Again, if you look at kind of commodity pricing, which is in part down to currency volatility, but also is it part due to global demand? I mean, if you look sort of 3-4 years, maybe 5 years ago, in sort of the massive price hikes there were in dairy, because China was basically buying up lots and lots of dairy because they believed that their population, which was growing slightly more slowly than they expected, but was still massive, needed more protein and more dairy, therefore supply and demand. So actually currency, that's down to you as a supplier to manage, really. You need to manage your hedging, you need to manage your volatility. I may have some sympathy if it's a part of an overall package, but typically it's kind of down to you guys to manage. And the quid pro quo of that, by the way, is I recognise that it's not appropriate for me as a buyer to then come and knock on your door when the currencies swing the other way, and I have the greater, I have the upper hand.
Thanks for that, Mark. In terms of listening into that, in terms of just thinking about maybe some of your thoughts, having heard the three other panelists talking, perhaps you could give us some of your thoughts as we start to wrap up the webinar.
Well, I started by talking about mindset, and even on this call, my mindset has changed, that I need to understand the language of my partner more. So language that I've learned is around mutuality. It's about mitigation. How can you help me mitigate this, supplier? So I've learned a lot, and I think that's part of the journey for all of us.
Thanks, Mark. Reflections from Colin, anything that you've learned having dialed in and listened, as well as being a participant?
Well, I think it's interesting hearing Matt's perspective on things, because what I hear is somebody that's a real owner, and I think possibly one of the directions I need to take from this afterwards is to think about each country and do the best I can to try and take our global messages and bring them down to more tangible chunks for our countries, and then get them to be the real owners. Because I hear from some of Matt's arguments that we don't have to be frightened of price change if we position it in the right way. And I think I can disseminate that message to other people. I think it's a strong one.
And Matt, same question to you.
Yeah, I think Simon mentioned something that made me think, and that's about one buyer sitting in a room with one seller, and it's much, much more than that, I think. There's so many more stakeholders behind those two, and I think there's enormous benefit to both buyer and seller and the price in terms of making that work, engaging, making sure that wider audience is engaged. It seems straightforward, right, but it's often something that's forgotten. Simon mentioned around, if you're a manufacturer of a commodity, making sure that buyer, that buying team and other stakeholders have been to the factory, have seen the product, know the Q&A and all those kind of things, because it puts price in a certain perspective. So I think the engagement of the stakeholders, I think, makes me think and reflect on that, actually, in my situation. That's been a good revelation. Thank you, Simon.
Well, there's been value for all of us dialing in. Simon, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think other than learning that I shouldn't just put the phone down and say no, it's really valuable to just kind of reiterate and kind of hear again from the sales side of the equation that you guys are doing the same things that we're doing. So actually getting to that place where we recognise that we need to look for ways to make these things happen where it's appropriate to do so, and that it's not just all about adversarial challenge. I think that has to be the way forward, particularly for those bigger relationships between important strategic suppliers and important strategic customers.
Well, look, conscious of people's time, we've been on for 50 minutes. Most people have got work to get back to, and also I'm sure they'll want to be dialing into the budget, which has just been announced. I'm conscious that the alcohol people that are dialed in will be glad to hear that there's no duty increase on alcohol and tobacco, which is great stuff. In terms of any further questions that people might have, please feel to drop us a note. My email address is below and telephone number. Alternatively, you can contact us through the Uspire website. I just wanted to thank all of our panelists, Colin, Matt, Simon and Mark. Really appreciate your advice, direction and builds. And without further ado, I will say thank you to everybody that's dialed in, and we look forward to hearing any questions you've got further to today's broadcast. Thank you very much and goodbye.